Hello, and welcome back to the next part of the in-class project. Today we're going to actually be doing the coding for this in-class project. But first, let's do a quick recap. And the goal of this whole in-class project is just to show you guys how, I would solve some problems. So kind of the steps and the procedure that I follow when I'm given some tasks to work on. So let's, usually we end up, or we start with some tasks. So maybe you've been contracted out by a client who wants a Hangman game, and this is kind of what they might email you. So you get something like this. They might even give you some wireframes or something along those lines. Or, a professor might give you something like this if you're taking another programming class. So what do we do with this? Where do we start? Well, as we discussed previously, kind of the first place to start and the easiest place is the goal. So let's come up with a goal that we're trying to accomplish with the software we're writing. So in this example, all we want to do is make a Hangman game that works well and is not frustrating to use. So we can kind of expand on this a little bit. So we don't want the program to crash. We don't want to waste users' time unnecessarily. So like I said, you move from something like this to the goal, and after the goal, after we kind of figure out what the goal of the software, the most overall job of this software is, we can move on to a couple of user stories. So I won't go over these again, but basically we just list out some of these as a blank. I want blank, or I want to be able to, or I want to blank, so that blank. So what this does is it kind of helps you organize yourself a little bit more and kind of see what we want to do. So we've taken the goal and turned it into a set of use cases, and we're going to take those, we have this wireframe too, so we got the wireframe. Sometimes we'll have to develop, sometimes the customer will give it to us, but we have basically these two things together make up what we call the requirements. So this is kind of what we need to develop, kind of specified a little bit further than just a goal. Anyway, so we take these things and then we move on to the architecture. So we took the problem statement, made a goal. We took the goal, made some user stories, use cases, and a wireframe or a few wireframes. And we're going to take everything we have so far, and we're going to decide at a very high level, what do we want the software to look like? So in our very simple case, we just have a user that interacts with the console to play a game, to play a Hangman game. So the next step is we take this architecture and everything that came before it to kind of come up with a design. So a lot of times it's useful to have these just bulleted phrases or these bulleted thoughts. So we know we want to get the word list. We don't want to hard code it. We'll read it from a file. So this is just some decision we made as developers. We know we're going to have some sort of main loop, so on and so forth. So, you don't always have to make this kind of bulleted list, but it's usually pretty helpful to organize your thoughts. Next, we took this list and we made some sort of flow diagram. And this is actually what we're going to use to start coding. And this actually starts to look a little bit like code. So hopefully you guys see how we can take something like this game or this prompt and then end up, thinking it through, sitting down and working on something like this, getting down to a level that we can actually start programming with. And then, of course, finally, we have our user story. So we'll write some use cases, we'll write some test cases that cover these scenarios. And we'll make sure we test these before handing them over to the client or before submitting them to the professor or whatever. So now that we've kind of gotten to the point where we're ready to code, I already have Visual Studio Code opened up, but let's go ahead and open a folder. Let me just go open. And this is going to be our workspace, of course. So I'm just going to grab, I think it's in my documents, actually. We're going to grab this workspace, and we can start coding from here. So I'm actually going to start just with some blank file. You can just call it hangman.py. Some Hangman Python file. So actually all of our code's going to be here. And we know that we're going to need some sort of file or, some sort of listing of words. So I actually have that right here. So I just went online and found a handful of the most common words. If it opens up, yep. So here's just a handful of random lowercase words. So we'll use this as our main input for the, or our input for the program. And we'll go ahead and make sure it's here in the same directory as our Python file we just created. So this Python file can read these words here. And we should see a pop up here. So we have our words, and then we have our new Python file. So when I'm giving it, or given a task, and especially with new development like this is, I like to kind of start with the comment. So what I'm going to do, and like I said, I recommend you guys do it, is start with something like this in sort of flowchart, and actually start with the comments. You start writing the comments, and then you kind of fill in between with code. So the very first thing that we need are our package imports. So we're going to have a few imports we're going to use, and I'm just going to comment this, say package imports, or module imports. Packages or modules, kind of the same thing. So we know we're going to have our package imports up here. We're going to have what we call global variables. We'll talk about that in a second. And these are basically just the variables to run the game. And these are going to be passed from function to function. So global variables, we have function declarations, or you can actually call this variable declarations. Probably be a little bit easier. Oops. Or we'll call them variables. We'll call this just functions. Oh, no need to add the word declaration there. CDIONS, functions. So we have our package imports will be here. Our variables that we're going to use to control the program are going to be here. Our functions will be listed here. And then I want one more section that I'm just going to call main. Main. Like this. So actually our main program logic is going to be here. It's going to use functions and variables declared here, and then of course packages that we've defined here. So we know that we're going to need to grab a random word. We know for a fact we're going to need that. So let's just start. We can just say import random. Random. Like that. So just to kind of get us started, we know for a fact we'll need that. We'll just put it there now. So this is what I was saying with, we actually start with comments. So the very first thing that we need to do in this program, the very first thing we need to do is read the list of words from the file. Read the list of words from the words.txt file. The next thing that we'll need to do, we know, is we'll need to choose one of those random words. We'll call the random word the secret word. So we're going to choose the secret word that they're going to try to guess. The next thing that we're going to need to do, now that we have the word, we're ready to start accepting guesses. And we know if we come back to our diagram, so this get random word from file is kind of these two steps. We know we're going to have some sort of while loop. And we can actually start, basically have some basic comment while we have guesses remaining. Remaining. And we have not guessed the secret word. So that's basically what this is. While remaining tries is greater than 0 and word guessed is false. So we have not guessed the secret word. We're going to have to do, a few steps. So kind of the first thing we'll need to do is to, I'm going to, basically what I'm doing is I'm tabbing this over because I'm indicating that everything in here is part of this while loop. So kind of like how Python does where we tab things over. This will make it a little bit easier to format our code later. But so the very first thing we need to do in this while loop is to go ahead and get the user's guess. So we can just say get letter guess from user, and we can say something like validate user guess. Or kind of a little bit better, we can say if user guess is valid, then we want to do something. Otherwise, else the user guess is not valid. And we decided earlier that if the user guess is not valid, we're not going to penalize them. So they can enter, and by valid I mean basically a letter, a single letter. So if they enter something that's not valid, maybe it's a question mark or it's a number. So that's what I mean by not valid. We're just going to reprompt the user. Reprompt the user. And then if the guess is valid, what else do we need to do? We need to check that we want to see if the letter is basically a repeat. So we already know that the letter is valid. So we basically know that the input that we have is a single character letter. And we basically want to say if the guess is not a repeat guess. And we can say an else for this. So if it is a repeat get, we basically just, once again, we don't penalize the user for repeat guesses. We just reprompt the user. We can actually just grab this text. It's going to be the same thing. Just reprompt the user. Tell the user that this was a repeat guess. Or we can just say display this is a repeat guess. Something like that. And then this we can say display this guess is not valid. So basically, if we're at this level here, we know that we've gotten some letter guess. The guess is valid, meaning it's a single character, a single letter. And we know that the guess is not repeat. The next thing we need to do is check if the letter is in the word, is in the secret word. So we can say something like if the letter is in the secret word, then what we want to do is update the display with the newly correct letter, or the newly guessed correct letter. And of course we have the other part of this is the else the guess is incorrect. Then what do we need to do? We know we need to, and this is all just based on this. So this get random word from file is here. These two lines kind of correspond with that. We have this while loop we've decided. While here. We'll come to this ending scenario in a little bit. What we need to do is get and validate user input, which is going to be here. This is getting, and this is validating the user input with this if else here. If input is correct, well, we missed the repeat thing. So we added this repeat. We forgot to add it here in this document. We didn't express that here. But ignoring this repeat, this if the letter is in the secret word, basically if the user input is correct, we want to update the correct guess, which we've done here. Update the correct guess. And then we have this else that we're dealing with here. Else the guess is incorrect. What do we need to do? Well, we have it here in our document. Update incorrect guess list and decrement tries. So we can just say update. We can say list of incorrect letters, and we can say decrement the number of tries remaining. Okay, so we have this kind of base logic worked out, and this is going to be, I just kind of explain this a little bit. So if the guess, else the guess is a repeat. So we've kind of expressed this kind of cycle here, from here all the way through, in our comments here. And we've kind of laid it out to where we're ready to start coding in between the comments. And then the last thing we need to do, since this is a while loop, if this condition becomes false or this condition becomes false, it's going to break this. It's going to break this while loop. So we'll have some logic down here. Basically, we just want to display, or we can say if word is guessed correctly, we're going to display a win message, else display lose message. I'll just put it here. We can say else the word is not correct, guessed. And I'll just put a couple of extra spaces here because it's kind of a second chunk of this big program. So the main, you can call this as kind of initialization. So the program is getting set up. We're reading everything we need. This is kind of the main bulk of the program, the main logic of the program. And then the final, you call this the, termination of the program is handled down here. And then that's, of course, show win or lose is handled here. So the only thing we've done is we've taken our design, which came from all of these other steps, and we've kind of turned it into a skeleton, if you want to think of that. We've turned it into a skeleton of the code we're going to write. So we can actually start filling in the gaps here. The very first thing we should do is read the list of words in the words.txt file. So to do that, pretty much everything here is either going to be an if statement or a function call. So we're going to have a whole bunch of functions here with a really simple reading of this main logic. And like I said, the advantage of that is if we had no functions, we had just all of the code in this big mess here. This is already complicated enough, this little bit here. If you had, 100 lines of code embedded in this structure here, it would be very confusing. Anybody would have trouble reading it. So we're going to have this basic main structure. We're going to have our while keywords, or if keywords, else's. Basically, that's it. And then function calls in this whole thing here. So, like I said, we need to start with this read list of words. So what we need to do is define a new function. We'll call it read list of words and, not braces. We want colon. All this is going to do is read the list of words. So if you don't remember how to do that, this is where, Googling stuff helps. So you can jump over to Google and, say something like how to read all lines in a file in Python. So something like this, how to read all lines. And you come over to this, a website like Stack Overflow, and then you can basically copy this or read from the notes however you want to do it. There's, especially in Python, there are a dozen ways of doing anything in Python, but I'm just going to use the way we discussed in class, which is just going to be something like words file list equals open. And we're going to use words.txt because that's what we've defined here. And we need to, of course, open it in read mode. R for read mode. And then all we're going to do is return this word file list. Now, of course, we could leave it at this, but if you remember back at the goal of the program we're trying to develop, one of the core goals is basically we don't want the program to crash. So what if this file doesn't exist? Or what if it has permissions that are set on it to where we can't read it? Maybe somebody else created the file without permissions. Well, it's going to crash the program. We don't want that. We at least want to tell the user that the file isn't there. So we're going to surround this with a try except. So we're going to try to do this, and then what do we accept? Well, the only thing that can throw an error here is this open. Actually we want to do return this dot read lines. My bad. So we're basically going to read the lines, and then we're going to return it out of this function to whoever calls this function. Whoever calls it can basically grab this out of this return statement. Anyways, we need to accept. We're going to accept IO errors. So anytime we get an IO error, what are we going to do? We're going to print something like words.txt can not be read. Check the file, or you can say check that the file is in the same directory as this .py file. So that's easy enough. But now this kind of comes, takes me to the next point of how we solve problems like this. We basically, if the words don't exist, we want to totally stop the program. We don't want to crash the program, but we want to basically tell the program to stop without crashing and making a big ugly list of display. So we can basically Google how to terminate program. Something like this. So we can Google these things. So there's sys.exit, there's some quit, there's exit. There are a few different ways of terminating a program. And when I actually wrote this program out before in preparation for this class. And when I wrote it out the first time, I actually had to Google this. This isn't something I just know how to do. And I had to try a few times, but the exit function worked for me to stop the program. So this is another key skill, is to be able to go on the internet and find and try different things. So for me, this didn't work. Import sys and sys.node.x, and I'm on a Mac. I don't know if there's some incompatibility, but this worked though, just exit. So like I said, it's an important skill as a programmer to be able to go and Google how to do certain things. There's a joke that most of the time programmers are just Googling, or that programmers are Google machines. And there's a little bit of truth to that. Being able to Google stuff is very important. Anyway, so we've written this function. So this is going to read the list of words from words.txt, and then go ahead and return each line in a list. And we can call that function, of course. So we'll simply call read list of words, and we need to catch this data out of it. So we can just say all words, list equals read list of words. So of course, because we're doing like this, and we can do this when we have this return. So what happens is we call this method executes, it does these lines, and then it captures whatever we're returning. So for us, we're returning this whole, whatever this is going to be that list of words. And then we're capturing it in this variable that we can use later. So the next thing we need to do is choose the secret word. Okay, well, let's go ahead and make a new method. Choose secret word. So what we need to do is basically get a random element out of this list. And we also need to pass in the list. Word list. It doesn't matter. So we're basically, we can say from, choose secret word from word, from word list. Choose secret word from word list, where we pass in the word list. So for us, we need to, if you remember about lists and how they work, they're basically an ordered set of elements, and we choose an individual element based on its index. So let's grab a random index. And also, if you remember, we start at 0. That's the first index is 0, and then the last index will be the size of this list. So basically what we want to do is we're going to make a new variable, random word, and you know what I just explained, we can come and we can Google this, you know, Python get random item in from list. Right, we can Google this, and pretty much nobody's had a unique, see, there's even a nice random.choice. And we can use this. And we're already using random here, so we can use random.choice. I mean, we're going to end up using that because it's a little bit cleaner, but here's what I did. Just copy paste. Basically, I get the random index, I get the chosen word, and then we have to replace new lines because when we have, oops, I have it here. When we have this file and we do read lines, you have to remember that each line also has a new line associated with it right here. So that's why we have to replace new lines with empty or blank. And then we do some other work we'll talk about later. We'll come and append this. But for now, what we'll do is we'll just, we use this choose function. It's a little bit nicer. So for now, we're just going to, if I copy this, we're just going to return random.choice of our words list. So this is going to grab some random word in the list. Cool. Next, let's just call this function. We can say secret word is equal to choose random word from word list, and we can say all words list. So now's a pretty good time. Actually, we should probably test at every single method. Every time we write some method or we make some change to method, we should go ahead and just go debug, start debugging, and actually test. So we went ahead and did a couple of steps. That's fine. But let's go ahead and test this. So we'll do print. And we're just going to print out the secret word just to see what, you know, if it's working okay. Oops. We'll say something like, your secret word is, and then we can just append the secret word here. And let's actually test this. Let's debug, oops. Debug, start debugging, and we'll see if it crashes or what happens. Let's run it. Okay, terminal. So it found some random word. So this time the random word was reaction. And then, of course, when we actually deploy the code or when we're done with the code, we'll comment this out or we'll delete this line of code. But this is just to, and we can just click here. This is just to test that our code's working okay. So secret word is guy. Let's do one more just to make sure it works okay. And finally, the secret word is going to be same. Okay, cool. So this part of our program, and once again, we'll just come here. And that's this part. So the first box, actually, you could even think of it as the first two boxes are done. We actually totally finished this. So we only have, you know, all that, not all that much more to go as far as the design. We're almost, you know, a good way through the design. So the next thing, we have to have this while loop. And we can actually just start writing while. The first condition is while we have guesses remaining. Well, we're not keeping track of our guesses anywhere yet. So we need to go ahead and add a variable, and that's why I have this section up here called variables. There's some things we need to keep track of throughout this program. So we can just say while, I don't know, let's call it number of guesses remaining. And we'll just start with 6. That's just some random number we'll use. So while this is greater than 0, so while we have at least one or more, or you could say, same logically, you can say greater than or equal to 1, same thing. And so our second condition, we have not guessed the secret word. Well, we're not keeping track of that, so let's add one new variable up here. We can say is secret word guessed, oops, false. Because at the beginning of the program, you have 6 guesses and you have not guessed the secret word. And secret word is guessed is equal to false. Oops. So we've kind of expressed this Now in this line of code, we've created a couple of variables. We have a couple of functions, and actually if we were to run it now, I don't even think it would run. From here on, it becomes a little bit harder to test just because we don't have any code here, and it's expecting at least something indented here, some line of code, some executable line of code at least. But so we can't really test right here. It's not going to work. So it's time to move on to the next thing. So the first thing we want to do inside of this while loop is get a letter guess from a user. So let's go ahead and just write some function that does that. Def get guess from user. And okay, so we know that we're going to need to use raw input, that we already know, but we'll also prompt the user. So we'll just say print please input your letter guess, and we'll just do return raw input function. So this is going to prompt the user and then get their output. And then of course we just need to call this get guess from user. And because we're returning out, we need to grab this. So we'll just say user guess equals get guess from user. This should be, hopefully this is making sense. And then once again, all we're doing is coming back to this get. And then the next thing we need to do, if we look at our comments here, we need to validate the user input. So let's write a new function, and we're going to do it a little bit differently. We're just going to say is user input valid. So this is going to return true or false, just because it's a little bit more convenient here. We can say if is user input valid. We can do something like this. So we can call this function inside of this if statement to make it look a little bit nicer. And we can do return true or false here. All the logic can be here. We don't have to have a complex if else condition here. We can just have a really simple one up here. Or, you know, maybe a complex one up here. But at least when you're reading through the code line by line, if maybe you have to work on this code a year from now, you'll think yourself that you've done something like this where it's really easy to read and then all of the complexities up here, and you've kind of separated it out. So what we want to do is what constitutes a valid guess. So we know that it has to be a single character, that is a single alphabetic character. So we will let's just do this. If you remember, we have length. Oh, of course, we have to pass in the input. Let's see. We call it user input. We can say if the length of user input is equal to 1, then we need to check that it's within the correct ASCII code range. So we're just going to do ASCII code to make sure that it works well. And then I have this line of code. This is just using the ORD function. Oops, I'll just do it. User input ASCII code is equal to ORD of user input. And then we just need to check if this is within some range. In the letter A lowercase a is 97, and an uppercase or a lowercase z is 122. So we can say if user input ASCII code is greater than or equal to 97, once again that's a lowercase a, and user input ASCII code is less than or equal to 122, that's a lowercase z, then we can say return true, capital T. And then basically here we're just going to return false. And the way this works is basically if the length of user input is not exactly 1, so it could be 0 or it can be 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, If this fails, it's going to immediately move to return false, and that's great. But if it is one character, so maybe it's a character 2, the number 2 that they've typed in, we're going to get the ordinal of that input, which is of course the ASCII code, and then this will fail. If this fails, it's not going to return true. It's just going to exit this if statement. It's going to exit this outer if statement and then return false. So this is a pretty common pattern. Is you have a stack of if statements like this, and then eventually they'll return true, or at the very end, they'll have return false. So this basically tells me, and then we should probably even define this a little bit more. We say is user input single alphabetic character, because valid can mean a few things, right? Valid's a little bit ambiguous, so we'll say is user input single alphabetic character. That's what we mean by valid. And we can of course replace this, and then the user guess is what we're checking. So if this user guess is a single alphabetic character, what's the next thing we have to do? Just following our flow here, we have to see if the guess is a repeat. Well, now we have to kind of decide, how are we keeping track of repeat guesses? Well, my suggestion is to keep those repeat guesses in a list. So we can say guessed letters. We'll start it with some empty list, because when you start this program, you haven't guessed any letters at that at that point. So we know for a fact we'll need that, and then we can go ahead and start this little function here. If so if user input is repeated, this is going to be some function we'll write, and we can say equals false. So basically, if the user input is not repeated, then we're going to do something. So we need to write this little function up here. Def is user input repeated, and we need to of course pass in the user input that we're going to be checking. User input, and basically we need to check if that user input is in this guess letters, and then every time they guess a letter and it's unique, so it's passed this test, every time they guess any letter correct or incorrect, it'll go inside of this list. So we can say if you remember how to use lists, and we don't want the parentheses, if user input in guessed letters, we're going to return true, and then else we'll just return false here. So if the input is not in the guessed letters, this return true won't execute, and then it'll immediately move to return false, and then in the function here. So we have this here. So basically, if the user input is not repeated, what do we want to do? We want to check to see if the letter is in the secret word. So kind of at this point, we have to make some decisions and kind of be a little bit clever. Now we can kind of talk about data representation. So how are we actually going to represent? So we have the actual the string here. We're calling it secret word, but it's a little bit hard to just work with a string. What I suggest is to have some sort of list like this, where each index is a letter from the word. So for example, if the secret word is hello, that's going to translate into a list that looks like this. H E L L O. So we basically want to take something like this and translate it into this. So let's write a function. And like I said, we're doing this a little bit in advance because we have to write this function next. We have to write this if letter is in secret word. So we're kind of thinking a step ahead to know that we're going to need to represent our data like this to make it a little bit easier. And what's more, we can actually kind of use this for a couple of things. What we'll do is instead of putting the actual letters in, we'll do like this. We'll put underscores in, or whatever character we want to use. We'll just use underscores. So this takes care of this requirement here. So basically what happens is, we have, let's say the word is Hall, H-A-L-L. We have underscores that we're displaying, and then when we guess the correct letter, we'll replace this. Let's say they guessed an E. We'll actually replace this underscore with an E in this list. So, there's lots of different ways you could think about doing something like this. This is just the way I chose to do it. To have a list like this to represent, there's probably better ways out there of doing it. There are probably worse ways out there of doing it. This is just the way I chose to do it. So let's actually make a new list. We can say secret word letters, and we're just going to start it out with some, we'll default it to something like this, just a blank list like this. So the next thing we want to do is we want to populate this secret word letters. And this is kind of what we were doing earlier in this other method. So let's just define a new method. We can say get letters list from word. And what this function is going to do is basically take some word and convert it into a list like we discussed before with these underscores here. Hopefully this will make a little more sense in a second. So what we have is we'll make some new list, kind of define it within this function. I'll just say letters list equals some empty list. And for each letter in this word, we're going to want to add an underscore to this list. So we want something like for, we just say I in range from 0 to the length of this word. And what this is going to do is basically get us values of I. We don't really care about the values of I. We're just calling it I. We're not even going to use it, but we have to define some variable here within the range of this word. From 0 to word. So this is basically, this loop's going to iterate for each letter of this word. And all we're going to do is letters list dot append. We're going to add an underscore. Once again, we're using the character underscore. We could use a bunch of different characters. You could use asterisk or whatever, but I think underscores work well for this. And then we can just say secret word letters down here after we've gotten the secret word. And this is pretty common. You'll come across steps that you didn't have in your original outline. And once again, this is already outdated. Once we actually started writing the code, this quickly became outdated as we started thinking about it. And once again, that's pretty common. And a lot of times you'll add steps into it as you figure it out. But we can say generate the secret word display representation. And secret word letters equals just this, get letters from list from word. And we're going to pass in our secret word we have. Secret word. So now what we've done, basically, if you read from top to bottom, we get the list of words, we get the secret word, we print it out, and then we basically just get a representation of these. And we've kind of done this in preparation for doing this next step, if letters and secret word. And then this step after it. So update the display with the newly guessed correct letter. So when they correctly guess the letter, this list that we've defined here, which sort of represents this here, is going to be updated with the correct letter at the correct index. So let's just let's move on with the next part. If the letter is in the secret word, so we can just say if is in secret word, and we need to pass in the user guess And then we'll need to pass the secret word. And we need to write this function. We'll just copy this, move here. And what we need to do is basically, if you remember in Python, we have the in, which returns a true or a false. So we can just say if in secret word, then we can say return true. Otherwise, would return false. And once again, we can actually add these else keywords in, hopefully. And a lot of times I'll actually program like this. You know, you could do all of this in a single line of code and still be perfectly valid, but a lot of times I do like this to be very explicit. I mean, we can just, like I said, any of these we can do like this. It's perfectly valid either way. And then we could even do like this, else return false. And then we'll have another else here for this first if statement. Return false, of course. So, I mean, I was just doing a little bit of shorthand. Hopefully you know, you're able to keep up with that fine. But if you couldn't, here's kind of what we're doing. You know, if it's the length is 1, cool, we move on. Otherwise, we know that it's invalid. Okay, if we moved on, is the ASCII code correct? Cool, return true, otherwise return false. So we were just doing a little bit of shorthand. Anyway, so either way. So we know that the letters in the secret word, i.e. that the guess that they've done is correct. So what we need to do is now update this display, update this secret word letters, update this based on their correct guess. So maybe they guessed an A in the word hall. We need to take it from all underscores to having perhaps the letter A put here. So let's go ahead and do that. We can say, we'll just say update secret word with correct guess. And then, of course, we need to pass in our guess, which is user. User guess. We'll need to pass in our secret, secret word letters. So we're going to update these letters based on this correct guess. And of course, we need to write this function. Okay, so when they correctly guess a letter, what we need to do is basically, compare each letter in the word. Let's say the word is hall. We need to basically go step over each, and let's say that the new letter will be A. We need to step over each letter in this word, find this index. So, of course, H is represented here. A is represented here, L and L. What we're doing is we're going to find this index and replace these underscores with the actual character that was guessed properly. So we need to go ahead and do that. For us, it's going to be, we need to iterate over each letter, which is going to be this. We already wrote this code, so we'll just copy and paste it. Same. So this for loop iterates over each letter in our word. Actually, what we need to do is also pass in the word itself, which is here, secret word. So we're going to have the letters, we're going to have the word itself, the string, and then the guess. And then we'll update the function call down here real quick. So this is going to iterate over each letter in the secret word, or actually probably an easier way of doing it is just do this for letter in secret word. So this should be just as easy as doing that range thing. In fact, we can simplify this down a little bit, but actually no, we can't do this, and I'll explain why we can't do this in a little bit when we get there. Anyway, so what we're doing is we're iterating over each letter because we need to grab this index. So this time we're actually going to use this index. and we're going to represent, get the letter or get the particular underscore that this letter corresponds to in this word and replace it with the letter. So for us, it's as simple as the way we set it up. Secret word guess sub I. We calculated the I here is equal to user guess. For us, it's this simple. And then, of course, at the very end, we're just going to return the secret word letter. So we've done some calculation on it. We've done something to it, and then we're just going to return it back out. And we'll catch it here. Secret word letters, which is what we've defined up here. Secret word letters. If the guess is correct, we're updating it with this data we're passing in. Okay, so let's move on. We can start with this else condition here. So under this else condition, what do we need to do? And well, we've already written the comments. We pretty much know what we need to do. Update the list of incorrect letters. Well, we've already defined that list here. Actually, it's not even incorrect letters. We can say update the list of guessed. Actually, this needs to even happen always. It's not even part of this if statement. We always update the list of guessed letters, whether it's in the word or not. So we can actually move this here. We could say, oops. Update list of guessed letters. So basically what happens is if the letter is not a repeat, we need to add it to the list and then proceed with whatever logic we want to do below. So we can say update list of, I guess, letters. So we need to pass in the guess we have, and we need to pass in the guessed letters list we're already keeping track of. That's here. We can say with new guess. So we're basically updating this list based on this guess. And we can just say this equals this new updated list here. So let's define this function. We can just put it here. And for us, the way we have it worked out is all we're doing is adding to this list. So for us, it's just this dot append this user guess. Cool. And then we need to return this, of course. Return guessed letters. After we've updated it, so we're updating it, then we're returning it back just so we can catch it down here. Like I said, there are lots of ways we can do this type of this, but we're just doing it one particular way. Not that this way is any more right or any more wrong than any other way we could do it. Okay, so now that we kind of once again changed this design again, we've moved some things around. We don't need to update the incorrect guess list. We always update the incorrect guess or any guess. So anyway, so coming back to if the number of tries, if the guess is not correct, then we need to decrement the number of tries. And we have the variable here, number of guesses remaining, and we can say def decrease number of guesses remaining. And we're just going to pass the number of guesses remaining. And we'll just do this equals this minus 1. And then we'll just return the variable. So all we're doing is we're taking some variable, we decrease it by 1, and then we pass it back out. So for us, all we're doing is we say number of guesses remaining is equal to decrease number of guesses remaining based on the number of guesses remaining originally before we decreased it. So decrement the number of guesses remaining. Okay, so we have all of this code all the way to here done. All we have are a few more methods we need to write, and then, we'll be able to actually be done with it and be ready to test it. So if the user, or if the guess is not a repeat guess, so we've taken care of all the kind of complex logic, else the guess is a repeat, we can just say else. What do we need to do? Display this is a repeat guess. So we can write some simple display function, def display repeat guess, and we're going to go ahead and grab the guess as a string to come in. And what we want to do is display some message. Print this is a repeat guess, and we'll just print the guess like this. So all we need to do is say display repeat guess, this function called the function, and we need to pass in our guess, user guess. Cool. So now we have this other else, which is that the input wasn't valid at all. The input was never valid. So let's, we have this else, we just fill in here, and then we need to, display invalid guess. Display invalid guess. And we're just going to pass in user guess. And it's pretty much going to be the same as this. And we can say display valid guess, and you can say this is an invalid guess. Okay, cool. So we have actually probably 80% of the program written at this point, and then all we need to do is finish this. So we actually, at this point, we don't have this is secret word guess. We don't have this calculated yet. We do need to calculate that to work on this function. We need to update this variable basically, because right now it'll just go indefinitely until you run out of guesses remaining. So what'll happen now is you basically, if you guess the secret word, it'll still prompt you for more guesses because we have guesses remaining. So we need to do that. So after we've decided that the letter is in the secret word and we've updated it, we need to say is secret word guessed equals determine if secret word is guessed based on secret word letters. And this is a new function we have to write. And we can say, add some comment that says update. We can just say see if the secret word is guessed, and we are done. Okay, so we'll grab this function. We have to write this function now. And we'll just put it here. Define a new function. And what we need to do is basically, we're going to kind of cheat a little bit. If within this we find an underscore, we know for a fact that we haven't guessed the secret word because none of our words have underscores. We can do some simple logic like that. So, maybe it's not the best way of doing it, but we can get away with it in this scenario. So we can just iterate over for letter in secret word letters. If we find an underscore, so if letter is equal to an underscore, we want to return false. Otherwise, return true. So if we make it through this entire list and we never find an underscore, we'll say the secret word is guessed. So that makes it kind of easy for us because we're using this sort of underscore method. But so what we do is if the word is correct, we update those secret letters, and then we determine if the secret word is guessed based on those letters. If we guess if there's some secret word in here, or if some letter that we guessed is correct. So now that we've actually updated this correctly, we can say if secret word is guessed, what do? We display a when message. We'll just call a method that. And we're going to display the when message, and we're actually going to display the secret word that we just guessed. Display when message of this secret word. And then we have this else condition we can kind of fill in. Else lose message based on this secret word. Based on this secret word. So let's copy, write these two kind of final methods, and then we have to do some cleanup. We'll see that we don't display everything we need. Display when message. We'll just say print congratulations. I think it's a T. Congratulations. You have guessed the secret word as secret word. And then lose message based on the secret word. And we're just going to copy this. And instead of saying congratulations, we'll say sorry. You have not guessed the secret word. So that pretty much wraps up the bulk of this program, most of this program. But as we'll see, there's some things that, despite how complex your design is, this one wasn't very complex, there's still things you miss, and that's okay. Now, we've done a lot of coding, and we haven't really tested it, so kind of the first thing to do would be to see if it compiles. So it didn't run. We see that in line 121, we're missing there's some problem with an else, so we can just jump down to 121. We see that we missed a, you call it a colon. We missed a colon there. Let's try again. Okay, so now we haven't missed anything major. Let's go ahead and run it. So it says, our secret word is shoe. Please input a letter guess. Let's just start with let's say 0. Let's try to input a 0 and see what it says. This is invalid. Please input a letter guess. Let's input a J, which will be incorrect. Now, of course, we're not printing any kind of details. We need to do that, but we should be able to see that it's actually, if we do like S, oops, so we had some problem that came up. We can actually fix this. It says in line 115, some method had a problem. Update secret word with correct guess. And then in line 59, which is this. It basically says that none type does not support item assignment. Oops. I think what we need to do instead is actually do put. Let me see. I think what we need to do, because we can't assign like that. Secret word letters dot. Let me see. That should work. I don't know why it doesn't work. Okay, so I'll actually show you kind of the next thing that we can do as programmers to kind of figure out what's wrong, and that's with debugging. So in they're different languages, they do it different ways, but in Visual Studio Code, what we can do is put what's called a breakpoint here. This is also pretty common. We put a breakpoint here, and actually when we run this, what happens is, and we run, let's do the same thing. So the word is sticky, let's input an S. It actually stops here. So the program stops executing right here, and we can actually see what's going on. So we can see the secret word letters. Okay, so secret word letters are coming in as none. So that's obviously some problem with the function call. We're not passing the correct thing in. So let's see where we're calling it here. So we're trying to pass in something called secret word letters, which we have here. So my suspicion is we're not returning. Yeah. So what we've done is we've actually calculated this letters list, but we're not returning it. Return letters list. We missed this line of code. So basically it's calculating this letters list, and then when we exit this program or this method, we're not actually sending the data outside. So I'm sure as we're fixing bugs with this, you'll see the debugger a little bit more. But it's another one of those convenience things. You don't have to have it. You could put a bunch of print statements through here, so you could print each of these to see what's going wrong, and that's how a lot of people do it, but it's much better to use something like a debugger. Anyway, so let's do this. Let's try again. So let is our word. Let's do L. Okay, so now we have another problem where it thinks we've guessed the whole word based on a single letter. So there's probably a problem with this. Update, determine if word is guessed. So we do is we iterate over each letter. If one of the individual letters is an underscore, we return false. Otherwise, we return true. So once again, we can put a breakpoint here, and we can start this again. And we can say run, and our word is tried, so T. And once again, we're here, so we have secret word letters as, all of them are T. So what happened was, there's some problem with this. See, we forgot an if statement. Actually, so this is updating every single letter to the user guess. And this is all part of the programming workflow, right? So when we develop, you got to kind of see a firsthand look on how this actually works in reality. So we missed an if statement. We missed an if secret word sub I. So if the ith letter of the secret word is equal to equal to user guess, only then do we want to do this. So that's what happened. And once again, so go over this one more time. We're gonna put the debugger, and we just do a single click here, nothing fancy, just do a single click here. And then when we run it, it'll actually stop at that place, wherever we put the breakpoint. So this time it's D, and now we can see. So now it's updated correctly, D with all the underscores. And all we're doing is hovering over whatever variable we want to see the value of, and this. And actually what we can do, see, this is pretty useful, but we can also step through the program. So we can say step over, and this is stepping over. And eventually it'll return false, of course, because the individual letter that we have is going to be this index 1, which is going to be the underscore. So let's disable this breakpoint and run it. Please input your letter guess. So the word is brass. Let's do B. Let's do R-A-S. S. Oh, so there's some problem with determining if we won or not still. So there's still some problem with it. Let's see. It's going to be determine if we've won here. Determine if secret word is guessed. Oops. So let's once again put a breakpoint here. Let's stop it. Let's run it. Run it. So the word is cruel, so C. Now secret word letter C. Oh, see, I bet you... Okay, I know what the problem is. So we can... So if we just want to continue, so if we have our breakpoint here, we just want to continue, we just press the play button again. R, enter. Now if we see our secret word letters, it's going to be CR. And this is a problem I had earlier, actually. So we just run. U. Oops. U. Run it. E. Oops. Run. CCRUE. So we know that cruel is only has an L left in cruel. However, our secret word letters have 2 left. So what happens is we input the E and let's input the L. Oops. Yeah. Input the L. And then we can see that next here. We can see that we've guessed the word, but we have an extra underscore at the end. And I mentioned this before. What this extra underscore is if we look at our file, it's because each of these has an additional new line. So when we grab our secret word, what we need to do is, it's here, choose secret word. What we need to do is also replace any new lines, which is the new line character, with empty quotes. And this will fix that problem. But we could keep testing, back and forth, but let's go ahead and improve this a little bit. So if we come back to the goal, once again, it's to be not frustrating. And pretty much at this point, it's frustrating because, well, the program doesn't crash. It's hard to guess our letters. In fact, if we come back to our user stories, so we have this one, we can put a check mark here. We've done this first one. They can input their letter guess, but they're not able to see this representation. So we have a representation, which is our secret word letters, but they can't see it. So let's actually write a new method that displays the secret word letters, just for them to be able to see. So once again, we've missed one of these comments, we didn't add all the comments we needed. And this is, once again, pretty common. It's pretty common to, go back, and if you get stuck, go back and think about the user stories, maybe add a couple more user stories, or come and tweak the design, add a couple more boxes here that we've missed. We're not going to mess with that because we're pretty much done with the program. But on big programs, basically in the real software industry, you'll do all this work, and then you'll work for 2 weeks with your team, and then you'll be done with those 2 weeks, and everything will be reevaluated. Everyone will look back at the design and tweak it, and then go back and program again for 2 weeks. But that's sort of beside the point. Anyway, so what we need to do is we need to display current secret, or we just say currently, or current correct guesses. Not even current. We'll just say display correct guesses. And we're just going to grab in this our word representation, which is our list here, secret word letters. We'll just grab this in, secret word letters. And we're going to print. So what we're going to do is basically for each element here, we're going to print it out. So for letter in secret word letters, print. If we did this, print secret word, print letter. What's going to happen is, as we know, it's going to print everything on a new line. In fact, if we run this and we say display correct guesses, we need to display this before we get the user input. So we can say the current state based on secret word letters. And we can see, and we can tweak this kind of left and right and back and forth, but what happens is when we do this, it's going to print everything on a new line. And like I said, it's pretty annoying. So let's actually Google it. So we haven't seen this before. We don't know how to print on a single line. So let's just go to Google and say Python how to print on same line. So this is something, once again, this is another important skill, is to be able to do this. Google, basically. Okay, so we can do something like this. I don't really like that. Okay, so this is interesting. You can simply use this. We'll print else, something else. So you can put a comma instead of having a, so this is a convenient thing they have in Python. If you put a comma instead of a semicolon, it'll actually print on the same line. So we'll save this out and we'll test it real quick and we'll actually see. Run it. It actually prints everything on the same line. Now, of course, at the end of this, we need to print some new line just so it displays correctly, because if we see we have to input one new line here, so that's why we have this print here. But that actually displays the current state. So actually, if we start guessing letters here, if I run this, so our word is healthy, let's do E. And oops, we have this breakpoint still. We can disable that and run it. It actually puts the E in the correct place. Let's do H. So it found the two H's and put them in the correct place. So that's good. So this part's working fine. And then, of course, if we do another E, it'll say, this is a repeat guess, E. Cool. So this is working fine. What else do we have? Well, we have one bug that we know of where this program can't handle capital letters very well. So the word might be almost, but if I do a capital A, it'll actually say it's an invalid guess. So that's no good. We don't want that. What we'll do is we'll just force everything to be lowercase, which is good. So we'll say get guess from user, and we'll just force it to be lowercase. Dot lower. So this fixes that small thing. So everything will be lowercase. We're forcing all of the words and everything to be lowercase. So the word is step. Let's do a capital P. Of course, it converts it to a lowercase so it matches correctly. Okay. We just want to this is kind of ugly. We have all of this jumbled up here. So what we'll do is we'll just clear the console out after we input the letter. So as part of, well, let's write a new function. We'll say def clear console. And for this, we're just going to do a really simple kind of hack to do it. We're not going to do it fancy or kind of even really good. All we're going to do is print a bunch of blank lines. Oops, this needs to be a colon. So we're going to grab, we'll just say 100, from 0 to 100. And we're just going to print some blank lines. So this is going to print 100 blank lines, 100 blank lines every time you call clear console. So, we could go back and you could Google it and see how to actually do it. But for now, once again, this is fine. And I wouldn't do this in my job. I would never do something like this, but for this, it's good enough. So clear console. And we want to clear the console only after we've gotten the guess from user. We'll say old data. And it's not really cleaning or clearing. It's, of course, just doing new lines. But when we actually run it, of course, it looks like, so let's say the word is young, Y, and it actually clears it out, or at least it looks like it does. Please input your letter guess. If we do another Y, it's going to say this is invalid. Okay, because I did too. If we just do regular Y, it'll say it's a repeat guess. So now it looks pretty good. And then a little bit more polish we can do on it. All we need to do now, really at this point, is we have all this stuff that we have before it, and then we're printing this. We don't want to do that, so we're just going to comment out this, and then clear the console before the program even starts. And this pretty much finishes it. Clear console. And one final run is, run. So now when we start the program, it actually starts like this. We don't know what the secret word is. We can't scroll up and get it or anything. So let's just do A. A. So I already did an A. Oh, you know what we need to do is print out our, we didn't even hit all the requirements when we come back here. So we did this. We did this. Oh, no. Yeah, we did this. So we don't have the list of incorrect guesses. We're not keeping track of that. We're keeping track of all guesses, looking for repeats, but we're not keeping track of incorrect guesses. And then, of course, we're not even displaying remaining guesses. So what we'll do is we'll print this, and then we'll display the incorrect guesses that we've tried. And then we'll display, of course, the guesses remaining. Okay, so a couple more functions we need to write. So here, when we display correct guesses, right below that we'll say display. We'll say display, we'll just say previous guesses. Display previous guesses. And then we have our previous guesses here. Guess letters. Display previous guesses. Is that a comment here? The list of letters we have already guessed, and then one more, which is just display guesses remaining. Display guesses remaining. Display guesses remaining. And we're just going to have that as number of guesses remaining. So we're going to display this. So we just need to write these two more functions, and then I think we're done. Def our guessed letters. All we're going to do is iterate over each of these. So for guess in guessed letters, we're going to print. We're going to use this comma trick that we learned earlier. Print guessed letters, or guess. We'll just do like that. I will put a space in. And then we'll do let's just say print previous guesses, and then of course we'll do a print at the end just to wrap to the next line so it looks better. So display previous guesses is fine, and then the very last thing we have to do is display guesses remaining based on the guesses remaining. Come on. Def display guesses remaining based on the number of guesses remaining, and for us we're just going to print remaining plus number of guesses remaining. Now a lot of you guys will actually already know that this isn't going to work, and then this is going to take me to kind of another point, or kind of reiterating the same point. But if we run this, I think everything should run fine, except, yeah. So basically we get this error. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have actually seen this as you're doing your homework, that you can't concatenate, or you can't use the plus symbol, because this is a string, we know, but this is a number. You can't add a string and a number. Now you can add two numbers, we know, you can add two strings, we know, but if we just, this is actually pretty common, you just grab something and we just Google the whole thing, and it'll pretty much tell you exactly what the problem is. So we can have some sort of comma we can do, or we can just go str of whatever we're trying to do. So we'll just wrap this in a string. Same that we've done wrapping between integers, or we've also called it casting. So sometimes if you get something you have absolutely no idea where to start, just start with Googling this if you don't know what it means. It's pretty much that simple. Stack Overflow has, I'd say, 98% of all the answers that you'd ever come across. Okay, cool. So now we have this. It tells us our previous guesses. We don't have any. And guesses remaining 6. And put a letter guess. We'll say H. So now it's updated our previous guesses correctly. We see that we didn't get anything correct. Let's do A. Once again, it wasn't correct. E. So there are a couple of E's. I, O, U. I don't know, G and H. So we have one guess. Oh, so we already did H. We'll just do K. Sorry, the word was different. So then, of course, if you scroll back up here, you can see D-I-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. So we didn't guess it correctly. Anyway, so this actually pretty much wraps up the whole program, about 200 lines of code with all of this. And really what I want you guys to take away from this whole thing is that, first of all, we want to be able to have like sections like all your functions are defined up here. And if you noticed, I mostly kept them in the same order that you read them here. But what's really important and what functions do, that's the most important thing you could argue, is that it makes your code really easy to read. So we have these comments that explain this line of code. So without this comment, it's a little bit, perhaps hard to read. Maybe if you kind of know the business or, know the domain that you're working in, this, you might understand what this does, but the comment really helps people who don't know. So we know that the very first thing we're reading this, and then we're choosing the secret word, and we can actually remove this. We can say, add another comment. Clear the console. Now, this is another hint that a lot of people miss. So a lot of people will stop here. They'll say clear the console, but they pretty much know that you're clearing the console. This comment's pretty nonsensical. It doesn't add a lot of information because the function is named well. What's really important is the why. So clear the console. You can say to get rid of, not get, G-I-T-G-E-T, rid of, you could say starting text. So what's more important is, why we're doing this here. So really you shouldn't have comments that say what we're doing. Mostly you should have comments that say why, unless it's something like this that we know it's pretty clear why we're doing this. It's, because it's part of the game itself, we have to choose a random word. But if you have something like this, or there's a kind of an odd line of code like this that almost seems like a hack, it's pretty important to have some sort of explanation. Anyways, I hope this project, these last couple of videos kind of have explained how we take something like this and how we can take it all the way through having some goal. And of course, what's important is did we meet this goal? And actually, we're not technically done. We haven't tried our test cases. We can try them real quick. So if I run this, we know capital A. Okay, it doesn't crash the program. Lowercase a is actually going to count it as a repeat because capitals and lowercases are the same. This, invalid guess, that's good. An at the rate or an at sign. Oops. Well, anything. That will also say it's invalid at the rate. We'll say it's invalid %. So now we're kind of in the testing phase, and we see that it's not decreasing our number of guesses because invalid guesses that aren't even sensical don't. And we'll try this funny sign here. Okay. The backtick 6, of course, 6, 1, -2. All of these don't count. And then we can, try to guess the word. Guess the word degree. Did I actually guess it? Let's see. Yeah, I actually guessed it. My last guess was an E. D-E-G-R-E-E. Cool. So we know that the win works too. Very cool. Anyway, so, the whole point of this was to show you how you can take something like this that's a little bit bigger than the simple programs you've written in the past, and how do you actually turn this into something that works, and something that works well and doesn't crash, and that plays nicely, and it has some nice polish in the sense that it looks pretty decent. you know what I mean, in the sense that these underscores are here and it's not just blank spaces and it's pretty easy, that type of thing. So for you guys, you have a small assignment. It's kind of just a token assignment. It doesn't, it's actually not programming, but I want you guys to kind of think a little bit about this. What's the point, or what's the goal? We can make it a little bit easier. What's the goal of software engineering, or of the software development workflow? So kind of in the first video, most of this is in the first video. This video is very much just showing you how you kind of lay out your code that's good, and how you can take something like a design that we saw. How do you go from this to actually having code that works? Well, the biggest tip that I can give you is actually take this and just start writing comments, and then do a lot more testing than we did. We didn't do a lot of testing. More testing is better, especially while you're developing it. The more often you test, the more frequently you're going to find little bugs that we had, and the easier they're going to be to fix. It's, you know, it was a little bit tricky trying to, after we wrote 10 methods and testing only one time, it was pretty tricky to find out what was wrong. But like I said, this I already tested before, and when I did it the very first time, pretty much every few lines of code, I pressed the play button. But I didn't want this to take as much time because it's already a pretty long video. But so I hope you guys got something from this as to, you know, how you take a prompt and go all the way through the workflow to having some working software that you can deliver. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you found it useful, and I see you guys next time.